Thank you. I know that this is kind of like the last 100 yards of the marathon, you know, sprinting to the end. So I do appreciate you guys coming back and listening to me. I think that between the three of us, we have a couple really good cases. The format was when Jeremy posed this idea to us was to share one case that we each felt pertained to shoeing for performance. So we've got a pretty good variety of cases here. My case, I chose a horse that I saw last year. It was a barrel racer, and I had been doing veterinarian farrier work for the owner in conjunction with another Ohio farrier, Mike Augenstein, so we kind of shared the barn together. The owner had brought this horse in from a race, and she was waiting to go ahead with the purchase until, you know, after I had a pre-purchase exam completed with it. So Hammer's a 10-year-old quarter horse mare. She presented for pre-purchase, and they wanted a barrel racer. She had been racing fairly successfully at this point. So here's before I get into the case, I want to kind of talk to you about the tool I used for it. A lot of you may be familiar with the Equinosis Q. They used to call it just a lameness locator. What it is it's a system of inertial sensors, and it measures gait asymmetry, which in my practice seems to have really been a huge benefit. The great thing is that you take the baseline data and then you have a digital copy of that to refer back to, and it's not subjective. So I don't know that, I'm not a firm believer that this diagnoses lameness. I think it's a very good identifier for gait asymmetry, and I think we have to extrapolate what we think that asymmetry is caused by and how significant that is for the horse and how it affects the performance of the horse. So this is a couple pictures of the system. There's a sensor on the pole. There's a sensor on the sacrum, which measures up and down movement of both of those areas. Okay, so those waveforms should be fairly symmetric between limbs. And then the sensor on the right front foot is just a locational sensor to tell the computer where the right front leg is in space and time, so that it can infer what all the other three legs are doing at that time. Okay, so like I said, it measures in millimeters, and so what they had done is they did a bunch of studies with veterinarians and tried to figure out, okay, so this tool is so sensitive, what is it that veterinarians can actually identify as gait asymmetries? So this is what the printouts look like. These are both examples of normal. So on the left side here, you have the front legs. On the right side, you have the hind legs. So if we go to the front legs, you have left front, push off, and impact. And this is just a little bit different than what the newest model is, so I'll show you that. But the point of it is that each one of these blue lines represents a stride in the front limbs, and then the red, sometimes it's a line, sometimes it's a dot. Ideally, you would like it to be more of a starburst pattern and then have a red dot in the middle, because the dot signifies the average of all of those. So that would tell you that there's not a lot of asymmetry to the gait. It's kind of tough to see here. It's easier to see on this one that there's a gray circle around that. That gray circle is plus or minus about 6 millimeters. That's what they figured out that the veterinarians could actually identify. So anything below that they consider fairly normal, okay? So that's what you're shooting for, is a pattern that's pretty similar to this, okay? So back to Hammer's case, the plan is that the owner wanted a pre-purchase examination done. Pending that, if we didn't find anything that was too scary, that she was going to go ahead with the purchase, and she wanted me to in turn shoe the horse in front because it had just been shod by Mike the week before. He knew I was coming for the exam. He didn't want to, felt like it was necessary to shoe the horse in front and then just to have me take the shoes off for x-ray examination and anything like that. So here's the graph, and you still have the right fore and left fore. And what this has it broken down into is it's impact, mid-stance, or push-off, okay? So it makes the distinction between those three kind of phases of the stride, because if you know where the asymmetry is or where it occurs in the stride, then it kind of leads you down a path of, okay, is this tendinous, is it foot? And if so, like for example, more impact lamenesses would be, all right, is the foot painful? Do you have heel pain? Anything like that? Maybe a push-off asymmetry would be, okay, does his deep flexor hurt because the deep flexor is working right during the push-off phase? So that's just the background on that. Hammer had a pretty significant right fore mid-stance asymmetry, okay? And the interesting portion of that is that it doesn't only measure, so it measures the difference in the maximum height and the difference in the minimum height between the two legs, so that when the pole goes up and down, it goes up and down twice during the stride. So it goes down once when the right leg is on the ground, it goes up, and then it goes down once when the left leg is on the ground. So it's measuring the height differences in maximum and minimum. So the interesting thing is that the difference in the maximum height of the head wasn't that much. It was only about 6.2 millimeters. But the difference in the minimum height, so how far the head was going down when the right front leg was on the ground, was 30.9, so about almost 4 centimeters. So that's a pretty significant head nod. And this is on an asphalt driveway in a straight line, okay? This machine works in a circle, but for this, I thought that this was the best example of it. So we continued on with the pre-purchase examination, and I started with some x-rays of the front feet, and we did a whole foot series, navicular shots included and everything like that. What I did notice just a little bit was there was a mild club-footedness on the right front foot, and the left front was a little flat. And what I see with these a lot of times is that farriers trim the club foot first, and because of the different positioning in the hoof capsule, generally, and this is a very mild case of it, which is interesting that we made such a difference with it, but generally with a mild case of this, it's not quite as noticeable. But on the worse the club foot, they tend to be in the hoof capsule at a higher angle, right? And so when you cut that sole to a uniform sole thickness and then you go to trim your hoof wall off, when you try to do that to the underrun foot, it's much flatter. And the reason for that is because the coffin bone's down inside the hoof capsule. Usually they displace, and they displace a little more squarely. So that's the flatter of the 2 feet. So this horse was originally just a little bit longer dorsal length on her left front foot. So the interesting thing is, and this is where I really start trying to get into the biomechanics of it, is if you look at the shoulders from over the back of the horse, she's standing square in the cross ties, but you can see muscle atrophy on the right side, and you can see some overdevelopment, if you want to call it, on the left side. So remember that the club foot is on the right side, the underrun foot is on the left side, okay? So I'm going to give you a little schematic here. This was a skeleton, but if you can look closely, what I took was one of those folding carpenter tape measures, okay? So to represent just the skeletal structure of the front limb. So when I apply that here, it's the same tape measure, the same lengths and everything like that. So here you have the shoulder. This blue marker is the knee, and then fetlock and foot. So this marker here and this marker here didn't move in either two of these pictures. What happens is that when you collapse this angle, the scapulohumeral angle, it pulls the bottom half of the limb upwards. So if you look at the blue mark, the blue piece of tape on there, which would represent the carpus, it's up above the baseline for the knee, which was on the back of the whiteboard there. So what does that do to the pastern? It raises the pastern. On the other hand, if you open the shoulder joint, it pushes the bottom half of the limb downwards. And you can see the relationship of the knee to the baseline here. And now you see what kind of an angle that causes the fetlock to have. So it's been my understanding that mismatched feet function on the ends of mismatched legs. And the only way you can make feet really match is to match the torque or match how the legs function. And then the feet will develop back to a more normal or more matching orientation. So keep these two pictures in mind. So what happens is that with the higher pastern angle, that's going to correlate to the higher foot angle, and with the lower pastern angle, that's going to correlate to the lower foot angle. So if we go back to this picture and we think about how that shoulder angle is here, so this is the one that is more open, and this is the one that's more collapsed. And I'll give you a little video demonstration of what this is. Compliments of Jeff Thomason again, and his point was to try and show how the center of rotation for the scapula isn't up at the end like you would kind of think. It's kind of down about a third of the way, and so when that scapula rotates, it rotates from kind of the middle third of it. So in my mind, when you see mismatched feet and you see shoulders like that, when this scapula moves forward like this, now he didn't put in the opening of the actual joint here because this was for something else. I wanted to show the rotation of the scapula. But when this scapula rotates forward, I think that's more like this orientation here. And when it rotates backwards down like that, I believe it looks more like this, okay? So that changes the way we manage them a little bit. I apologize I didn't get before pictures of the shoeing process on this horse, but really what I chose to do is just I shod the underrun foot first, and I cut it to a uniform sole thickness, and then took as much foot off as I could. The other foot, I really just took the other shoe off and rasped it. I put some handmade concave 3/8 by 3/4 on, just because it was a barrel horse. And then on the underrun foot, what I tried to do to match the horizontal component of the toe, or how far the toe sticks out in front of it, because the club foot always is a little deficient. It's a more upright and a little bit deficient in horizontal length. So what I do is on that one, generally I would rocker the toe, but since it's a concave shoe, I just kind of set it back just a hair. And so on the upright foot, I just did a perimeter fit, okay? But I probably changed the horse about 3/8 to not quite a ½ inch overall dorsal length. This was after shoeing. So then what I did was I told her beforehand, I said, you know, normally we went through all our flexions and things like that, and couldn't really make the horse worse or better or anything like that. So I said, well, normally I would start doing some nerve blocks, but I don't want to block this horse and then go ahead and shoe it, right? I feel like that's risky. So we put the front shoes on it and then hooked it back up to the equinosis. And then I said, if it's still very asymmetric, then we'll continue on with our blocks. Well, surprisingly enough, because I've had a lot of luck on these with long-footed horses, because you can make a really big difference in one shoeing period. This, I'm thinking there's only about 3/8 of an inch difference, and I wasn't anticipating making this big of a change. So this was the graph afterwards. So not only did we change the orientation of the lameness or the asymmetry, so it went from a mid-stance asymmetry to a impact asymmetry, but it also reduced the magnitude of it. So this is pre-shoeing on the left, post-shoeing on the right. And the interesting thing is when you calculate this out, or just do some simple math anyways, before shoeing it was 30.9 millimeters, how far down that head was bobbing on the club-footed side, and now after shoeing it's only 10.5. So you made a pretty significant difference in just the amount of time that it took you to shoe the horse. The way I was taught was that the clubfoot functions, it's not that the bones are any longer or shorter between the two limbs, it's that the soft tissue holds them in a different position. And so the clubfoot actually functions shorter than the underrun foot. And so it kind of falls in a hole as they're trotting in a straight line. So by doing this, I'm trying to achieve, lifting that foot up out of the hole vertically so that that head doesn't drop down in. And this is actually a really cool case because this is something that has been kind of ground into my psyche since I first met a few of my mentors and stuff like that. But this was the first tangible, measurable case that we had. We have video evidence and stuff like that, and I apologize for using the graphs, but I think it's easier in a setting like this to show you a graph than it is to just all of us sit here and watch a video of a horse before and after. So the really cool thing is that, so this was in April when I did the horse the first time, and then Mike and I got together. I can't remember if he reset the horse the first time or if I reset it with him. So June 30th, here we are, still decreased magnitude than original, and it's still more of a kind of impact, but we're down to, and this is before shoeing. Okay, so I rechecked it before we reset it, so we're still down at 11.7 millimeters. So the only thing that I did between those two examples is that I did some electroacupuncture on it right after I did it the first time, but that's 8 weeks ago, and I'm not going to try and sell you a bill of goods. I think that the acupuncture does really good at short-term relief of muscle pain, but it's not going to cure problems. So we still have I really am a firm believer that the shoeing change is what made the biggest difference, because acupuncture may have lasted a week and a half to 2 weeks, but it's not going to last 6-7 weeks. So this is June 30th. We go to August 8th, the next recheck. August 8th, same thing. Diff min, we're at about 15 millimeters, but there's some things going on with as far as the, thanks. There's some things going on with the diff min also, so it's kind of equalizing, I believe. October 18th, we're still doing well. It's changed. It's shifted just a little bit back to a mid stance, but still the magnitude is really not that bad. And then so here's our final comparison of before the very first time I saw the horse, and then August 8th, quite a while later, and we're still looking really good. And so my contribution to this, I think, hopefully, is that I think gait asymmetries affect performance, and it doesn't matter what type of performance, and I think it's important to manage those, and they're not all simple, or I shouldn't say they're not all lameness. I think there is a mechanical component to gait asymmetry, and this is a good example of that. I've had horses, and I know other practitioners have had horses where they blocked them all the way up to the shoulder and they're still asymmetric, you know? Well, if you tape a 2x4 on your foot and run down the hallway, you're going to bob your head. Now, if I block my leg all the way up and still have that 2x4 on my leg, I'm still going to bob my head, you know? Because I was bobbing my head because I'm mechanically asymmetric, not because of pain, you know. So that's my contribution to this lecture. I think that it was a really good case, and it kind of, you know, broadly covers a lot of different things. And I think that we all run into horses that have mismatched feet. So I think we're going to switch computers out, and I believe we're going to do questions at the end. So, okay.
And as a reminder, we do have the 2 microphones, so as Adam said at the end, we'll take questions. I'd like your favor. I was talking to Frank last night, and as you know, he had a health issue with his family and was disappointed about not coming and sort of sad about it. And so if I could have you, on the count of 3, say hi, Frank. When I take this video, I'll send it to him and help cheer him up. So 1, 2, 3. Hi, Frank. Thank you.
How's that? Hi, everybody. Having a good lunch? Looks good. I don't like to eat before I talk, so I'll get some after. So I'm going to present a case that we came through the hospital. You know, I work in a pretty busy veterinary hospital, and at times things are crazy because we have several senior vets who have their cases, residents that have their cases that work with them. And we have our outpatients that come into the Farrier shop at Cornell. And sometimes cases come in, if it's a lameness problem, they're going to let me know. But if they think it's, you know how a lot of times people think that, or veterinarians, especially residents, if it's below the hairline, coronary band, it's the Farrier problem. If it's above it, it's not a Farrier problem. So they didn't let me know about this case, because this was above the coronary band when it came in. And so I don't have the initial pictures of this when they first came in, but I'll show you some related ones as I go through this. So this is a Cooper is a quarter horse, big tall horse, almost about 16'3", very, very lame in his right hind. Large hematoma on his lateral coronary band above the hairline. Very base narrow, and you'll see he has a very flat palmar angle, and he had very, very light, thin aluminum hind shoes. And if you see by the radiograph here, he's got, you know, very flat palmar angle, and you won't see that much from this one, but as I go to this next one of this dorsal palmar, you can see how imbalanced he is, and you can see this is the lateral side right there, and you can start seeing that there's something not right here. Everybody see that? Got all this length here, people over here. You can see that length difference here to the hairline, and you can see how this chronic imbalance has been bothering this horse. Here's another shot, actually after they radiographed him, after I put shoes on him that day, and I did something that you'll see in a second right there to deal with this. But you can see now he's much more even in his his stance and his alignment. He's not perfect. I have a heart bar on him with a frog support in there. This is his stance, and this is after shoeing. You can see how base narrow he is. And you see this arrow where it's coming down from the outside. So we see a lot of these horses that are base narrow, and the taller they are, and the more base narrow they are, the more forces they're putting. And Randy talked about this. They're standing on the roof of a house. So it's a very great example. But you got a lot of this mass, and this is a very, very powerful horse. His hocks are bad, you can imagine. If you see these hocks pointing straight back, when you walk around these horses, you know that you yourself better be stretched out pretty well, because this horse is going to pull your knees through your hind end. And so this is created, this kind of problem is created by the conformation. And then the hard training and use of this horse. This horse is a very high-end hunter quarter horse, and he's worked really hard because he has to be to do well. And so here's your heart bar shoe put on to support the frog and sort of relieve the outside of this lateral branch. And so here's what he looked like after resetting him once. And you can see this groove that I cut in there on the lateral side. I took a Dremel tool and went right around. I was very close to the coronary band when I did it. And so those pictures, we weren't able to get those. And here's what it looks like, side view after it's grown down some. And you can see this is pretty well relieved now. There's your radiograph as it's moving down. And as we get several months down the road, the coronary band is straightening out. The hoof wall is starting to look a lot better. And there's your heart bar shoe again on the reset. There we are, another shot of that. And I have a lot of extension out here to support this hind limb and to keep this kind of floated. Another view of that, just to see how that's kind of come down. And again, another view from the hind. Here we are in 2.6. You can see how this hoof is just constantly improving, and that groove is coming down. Another view of that. And comes back on 3.13. This is how he comes off the trailer. Foot was a little dirty, but I took a picture right there because I was so amazed at the growth rate on this and how far that groove had come down. There's a close-up shot. And after we reset him, we cleaned that up a little bit. There was a little crack starting there, but I took a lot of that off and just kept trying to keep this foot in the right place. And we keep going forward with this. Some nice shots. Here's what the bottom of the foot looks like at this point. This was all torn up previously. And this is the damage that has come down from the coronary band. And again, I kind of widened out this shoe a bit more, fullered it out just to keep it out there. 624, we're really getting that further down. See how that moves forward? The whole thing progresses forward. But this horse is now in steady work from being 3 out of 5 lame and not being used. This horse has been in steady work all winter and is actually getting ready to go back to competitions. And so I put steel on him and fullered that out some, ground out the inside branch, and I'm trying to float the outside heel. We're in contact with the foot at this point. Horse is going really well. Horse is happy. And I had to really fight with the, not fight, but discuss with the horse owner when I said I want to put steel on this horse. And you know, the quarter horse people just think if they don't have aluminum, they're not going to do anything. Well, let me tell you, these big horses actually move better with steel because they're supported better, they're held up better, and a lot of these big horses that they want to throw aluminum on are usually not as moving as well, in my experience, as the ones we put steel on to give them the support and the foundation that they need when they're that big and that strong like this horse is. And there he is, shod up with a steel shoe, fit full. I probably would even like a little more length on that, but that's the way it was that day. Here we are, 813, and we've rebuilt some of that area just to give them a little more hoof integrity. We have that little notch there to deal with, but that's growing down just fine. That's not going to bother anything. And there he is walking out of the shop. And this is a similar case. I want to show you what this looked like when we first got it. This is just a draft horse, a Belgian, where same thing, very base narrow, and a lot of excessive flare was left on this horse, creating that same kind of leverage against the coronary band. And you can see what these things look like. And originally a drain was put in like this on this quarter horse also. The residents, to say, got to this before I did, and then all of a sudden it became a shoeing problem. But if you see the close-up here, that's coming up next, is after this drain. You can see where we groove underneath these things, and you can see immediately after the groove, you can see the way the coronary band is actually separating and opening up and relieving that area, and all this trauma has a chance to go away. Another close-up here. Sorry. What happened? What did I do? Oops, I see what happened. Yep. Fast forward here. And so you see how this is actually, this photo, these first photos of this were taken about 2 or 3 minutes apart. And you see how this is just opening up and opening up and opening up as you relieve this pressure off these guys. So in conclusion, I'd just like to say a chain is as strong as its weakest link. And sometimes when you put excessive strain on a horse's leg, that's what's going to happen. The weak link is where it's going to break or where you can have problems. So it's all about forces on the anatomy. And so, again, working with the vets and helping them finish the initial diagnosis is what we do. Thank you.
Does that work? Okay, when I first agreed to come to the summit and do these talks, I was really excited about this one. And I'm a pretty busy person, got a lot of things going. I should have listened better, and I was not prepared for a presentation like this. I was thinking it was a panel roundtable discussion. So you're going to get a little bit more of that than these great PowerPoints that you just got from these two guys. This is just a simple case, a few pictures of a horse that I got to work on this last summer. He is, let me see here. Here's the history of him. He's a 2-year-old quarter horse racehorse. And last September, he broke from the gate in his very first race. And the horse next to him broke over on top of him, ran his right front leg right down the left front leg of this horse, and peeled all the hide off all the way down, stepped on top of his foot, and believe it or not, this horse still ran 4th in this race that day after this happened, and of course was very lame afterwards. Came back in, they thought his injury was from the lacerations down the front of his limb. The lameness continued over time, went back in, did some more radiographs later, and found that he had a pretty good fracture in P3. So if you put some arrows on there, you guys can see that all the way through. So this is the day that I saw the horse, and you guys can see it starts all the way over here and then curves right around. So we were sure hoping that it didn't get all the way into the joint. So I think it ends right there. Do both sides here so you guys can see. Can you guys see how that curls in right there? Yeah. So went in, and here's another view over here. Show what happened. So that's why it's so far apart, because it's already weeks old before they realized it was there. So went there, just took a small piece of steel, but I like width of steel, so I wanted to build what they call a bottle cap shoe for it. And so this is just 12 inches, 5/16 by 1. I was trying to welded it, then took a center punch, and I just marked 2-inch increments. And then I just forged away from those marks and left that material there, and just had a measurement of my foot, the widest part, diagonal and heels, and I forged the shoe out to fit. One thing about fitting these types of shoes to a horse with a major injury, a fracture, things like that is you always want to fit nice and tight the first time. Don't leave a lot of material hanging, fit real baggy, because you can imagine with lameness, that foot is going to get smaller over time. So you'll end up having to build a whole nother shoe that fits later on. So got through here, it's fullered, got the clips pulled, everything else, and then that's the bottom of the foot there, just fit with the burn. With fitting this type of shoe, you want to start with the toe clip, and then fit your quarter clips, and then you got to have all your other clips out, and then the last ones at the heels will be the ones you bring in and fit at the very end. So with your initial trim, you want to be real careful about leaving length, because it's quite a few burns to get these to fit like they're supposed to immobilize the hoof capsule. So talking yesterday about fit and burn, I just took this picture here about having everything pretty uniform from here, center stock, the box, same as Travis talked earlier, everything around, but you guys can see the 5 clips. And this is a really small shoe. It's not a very big foot on this big guy. And then there's it all nailed up. A few different views of that put in, just to kind of see how everything was put together. And all that wrap is still from the injury where the horse stepped down and then stepped on top of him there. So there we go. But I really wanted to talk about with shoeing the performance horse is a huge subject. And it's been really neat listening to these two guys talk and have the availability of the tools that they have to them. But like in my practice where I'm at, most people aren't going to pay for that kind of stuff. So being able to walk into an account, either it's a new account or even an old account, and be able to do your best you can by that horse, in my opinion, is really understanding anatomy, gross anatomy, watching the horse walk, evaluation, and then getting a game plan together to create the best hoof capsule. So I always felt that if you gave the horse the best type of foot that he can have, then he's going to be able to do the job that they want him to do the best. Does that make sense? And I think we get a little caught up sometimes on trying to fix stuff that we kind of forget about. If we took the time to get a healthy capsule and then stay out of that horse's way for his conformation, I believe he would do his best job as a performance horse. And then after that, you find your different pathologies or lamenesses a horse might have, and then you move on to the next steps and get help with a veterinarian or things like that to help you get that horse to the next level. So I listened to a talk earlier today, and the whole talk was about teamwork. And you really, really have to have a good team and everyone have the same goal. Adam spoke great with it. He talked to the owner, he talked to the other farrier, things like that. Everyone had a plan, and the plan worked. Same with Steve. And that's been the consensus of all the lectures that I've heard here this week so far. And wanted to just talk about this. This is at a vet clinic, x-rays then, x-rays after. And this horse now is just went back to a regular bar shoe on him and sent him back into training. So we're going to see how he goes. So they're thinking he'll need to wear a bar shoe the rest of his race career. But it was nice to be able to work with people on a horse of that level and have everybody put everything they could into it. And being able to communicate with the vet, the owner, scheduling. This lady did exactly what she's supposed to do. The horse stayed up like he was supposed to. Took his feedback, everything that she was supposed to do to help him be the best performance horse he could be, maybe. So if we kind of talked to all of our customers that way and expressed a game plan from our point of view for their horse to be the best for whatever discipline they are, I think that's where horseshoers mess up a little bit. We get to a little bit of, we're going to roll in, get these horses shod and roll out, and if the shoes stay on, then we did our job. But definitely moving on in 25 years of shoeing horses now, that has paid a lot of bills for me over the years. But I really feel like to shoe the nicest horses and keep a good business, and also to think about longevity of yourself. You know, shoeing horses in a nice area on nice cross ties that are used a lot as performance horses is going to be easier on your body than shoeing old Fluffy twice a year, like some of the photos I showed you guys yesterday. So just think about education then. So going right back to shoeing performance horses, you need to have a plan with yourself to get as educated as possible. You know, that's why everyone's sitting here, right? You guys didn't come up here just to get away from your family, I hope. So, but it's to get to be better educated, have a game plan for yourself so that you can do your best by this horse that can't talk, or you do your best by the owner that doesn't know, and be educated enough to communicate with the veterinarian so that everyone's on the same plane. Cool. Thank you. Keep this on.
Okay, we'll open it up for the Q&A, and please use the microphones in the aisles. It's a little difficult to hear up here. But what questions do we have?
I killed them for you guys.
Got to be somebody out there. Nobody at all.
Dusty.
Yes.
Oh, over here.
Right here. Fitting up these clips and burning them in. I mean, the standard quarter clips, you kind of burn it back and everything fits. I'm having trouble wrapping my brain around how, as you got back to those back two clips especially, how you kind of make that all fit on there.
So the way I do these shoes is that I start with the toe clip, just like you would, and then the next heat would be the quarter clips. Or you could do those three together if you got lucky right off the bat. And then but you have to have the ones at their heel laid out, because you can't have a lot of expansion or the whole idea of the shoe doesn't work. You want the less movement as possible, correct? So those are laid out. So then the last ones you would do would be slowly bringing those in until they more or less slid up the hoof wall and they don't come in from the side of the hoof wall. Does that make sense?
Right, okay.
I asked this in the last one too, but you always hear so much that lighter is faster. And in your experience, you three, have you ever seen that thicker shoes, like big sections, does that affect performance horses at all?
Yeah, I think there has to be a balance between stock selection and hoof size. And I think that part of that goes back to what kind of the ratio of how long of a pastern and what angle that pastern is at. Because a thoroughbred with a 6-inch pastern is going to be able to put a lot of torque to that foot. And so a lighter shoe may actually not be the best thing for it, okay? I think that if you got a really long lever arm out there and can generate a lot of torque, sometimes it actually benefits the horse to have a little bit thicker section underneath it. Whereas some of the shorter, more upright pastern feet don't necessarily need quite as much. Now, when you get into that, you also have to take weight into account, and I think that depending on what the horse is doing, the shorter pasturing horses can sometimes benefit from actually a little bit more weight because they can't generate the torque that the longer pasturing horses do. So I think it's kind of a balance between what the horse is doing and how much it can tolerate and what condition it is, because you put something that's a little bit bigger section on a horse that's out of shape, it's not going to have the same beneficial effects as if you take one that's really a high competing athlete or something like that, and you think, well, I need to stick this horse to the ground a little bit more and something like that. So,
Yeah, I agree with you. There are some horses, the reason why you race horses with aluminum is to not carry as much weight around the track. And generally speaking, I think most of us would agree that's a sound principle. But you have horses that are injuring themselves occasionally because they don't have enough shoe on them. So what good is if he's fast if he breaks? So you want him to be as fast as he can without, breaking anything. And a lot of horses, they do. I have horses that come in with aluminum because they're crappy movers in the hunting ring. And really, they haven't been trimmed and balanced right. And then you trim and balance them right, and you put steel on them to give them more, shoe underneath them. And the trainers are telling me, wow, the horses never move so well. And so the aluminum, on a big horse especially, the aluminum doesn't have that much effect as it might on a smaller, lighter boned horse too.
any thoughts there, Dusty?
I got lots of thoughts on that. Growing up in the Western Pleasure world, I've been world champion, showed world champions, and raised horses my whole life. And so that's Jody Gallion won the world in 1969 with aluminum shoes, and so we're all using them since then, So you can thank him when you see him. And I think horses have suffered severely because of it. I've watched a lot of slow motion video. Bob Pethick has a really good video out of same horse on a track, slow motion video, barefoot, aluminum, 3/8 by 1, 1/2 by 1. And the height of the knee never changed. Now the arc would change, but the height of the knee wouldn't. So I think that going back to weight, or if you hear a customer say, I think the thickness of the shoe is causing me problems, I just think they're uneducated. And the better shape your horse is in, he will be able to adapt to the materials it takes to keep his foot together, going right back to what I said a while ago. And you got a horse that weighs 1,100 pounds at a full run. I don't really know how 4 or 5 ounces on each foot in a team rope and run or a barrel race and run. I could definitely see it in an endurance type where weight would make a difference. But that's what I think.
Okay, so much of the performance horse deal, Hoofcare, comes down to the environment these horses live in at home, management, and all that stuff. So, and then with all these therapeutic cases, we can go from hero to zero in aftercare. So in terms of that, could you kind of talk about why you chose a bottle cap shoe instead? You noticed you didn't have any packing underneath that thing or any of that as a casting or things.
There is packing. I just didn't get to that slide. So.
Okay, but what just in selection, I guess bottle cap shoe isn't always the first thing that comes to mind. Some of these, was there environment factor that helped?
Yeah. So the reason, actually, I've been a competitor a long time, and this is a shoe that I got to make it at contests, and I like it. And I don't know how to weld with a welder, so I can't make a full rim cap one. So I'm just stuck with the poor tools of an anvil and a forge. And this was called me on the day I happened to be right up by the Oak Ridge, and they said, hey, can you come in here and put something on this horse? So this all happened in a span of an hour for me. So that's the steel I had on the truck, was a wider steel, 5/16 by 1. So for that day, for me to do what I felt this horse needed, that's why I chose a bottle cap.
Well, I'd also say that owner compliance with, shoeing schedule and turnout and all that stuff really makes a difference. If you have an owner that will do more or less what you say and keep the horse on The reason, we're talking about rehabbing a horse, getting him back to work. And so there's a curve here. It starts off, this horse is injured or lame, and maybe he's not going to go back to work. And what happens is you bring a horse, they bring a horse in, we diagnose the horse, the horse is obviously lame, we use the lameness locator also, and then we see the horse has made a 83% improvement on his gait asymmetrics, but this horse needs to recover. And next thing you know, they're bringing him in a month later, and he's lame again, and you ask him what they're doing. Well, we started jumping 3-foot fences. And, the horse didn't even give a chance to the horse to get over what was bothering him. Just because he's sounder, or, moving better and feeling good, they're all in a rush. They're all in a rush. So you got to really get after them to rehab the horse and bring him back, in a reasonable sense. And we put that in the discharge for sure. So it's on paper.
My question was on the barrel horse and the race on this horse of P3 fracture. What kind of timeline did you leave him in the racehorse here, in this type of shoe before you went to your bar shoe? And on the barrel horse, how long did you continue? Did you use the same process? Is he in the same setup that you originally put him in?
You go first.
Yeah, I'll go first. I actually just did this horse again last week. It was at 5 months, and all the x-rays came back nice. You could just see barely a little bit of changes on the parietal edge of the coffin bone at the lateral view, and that was it. So that's why we decided to pull this shoe off, and felt like it was healed as much as it was going to heal, and just put a fuller straight bar, yeah, with packing, and still the whole time had just a regular shoe. The horse actually went really sound in about 72 hours after this. So I didn't feel like I needed to put any type of heart bar or frog support on the other limb right away. So yeah, and he's already gone back to the trainer to start getting back in shape.
For my barrel horse, I think that the most important feature of that case was that, it wasn't a significant difference or a significant club foot, and I think the mistake that had been made for most of this horse's life was that they were trimming either they weren't checking toe lengths just as a ratio, and I don't think that they always have to match, but just keeping them close in some sort of semblance. But I think that the horse had been trimmed too short in relationship on the club foot than the other foot, and so once I changed that, and I trimmed the low foot first, we've been maintaining it at the same length. And so, if you want to talk about really deformed club feet, I have some information on rehabbing those and shoeing those and stuff like that. But, on a barrel horse, if this had a grade 3 club foot or something like that, you're not going to make as much of a difference. And I use this case because there wasn't that much of a difference in the feet, but there was a lot of asymmetry to the gait, and just changing the feet a little bit made a big difference. So, and I had a long-term change. So basically what we did, what the approach was, is just always shoe the low foot first and then match the other one to it. Don't let that club foot get shorter than the underrun foot was the main thing.
You're matching the length of shoes are the same from heel to toe, as well as length from hairline to ground.
Yeah, so the good thing about when you pay attention to those a little bit more, because imagine the surface area on, if you cut a 2x4 at a 45-degree angle, okay? One of the reasons that I think club feet are actually smaller is because of the angle, and we cut them a little bit shorter as a tendency. So when you leave vertical depth on them and match it to the other foot, I put the same size shoe on both foot. Now it was just a hair short on the underrun foot, but remember I set that shoe back just a hair, and that made up for some of my heel length. So on the really deformed ones, you can really make a big difference in actually going up a shoe size on the club foot by leaving some extra length, whereas normally you might have two different shoe sizes and still be too long on the club foot. So that horse is still shod like that and winning and doing well. So.
In the case that Mr. Kraus talked about with the horse that was base narrow behind and it was causing the jamming of the lateral branch, which caused the raised hairline and the issue that you had. On a horse like that, it tracks base narrow. Would you attempt to fit the lateral branch fuller and wider out of the foot to try to help pull the feet apart and kind of get him up under his hip a little better? Or do you feel that would be contraindicated and load that side more than you're wanting?
Well, what you're trying to do is put some shoe under the coronary band, and a lot of these horses, if you look where the coronary band is versus where the bottom of the foot is, in this case it was way under. I'm sorry I don't have the original shoeing job on this horse, and probably just as well because I'm not trying to make someone look bad. But it was a light pair of aluminum shoes fit very tight behind, which was not helping this horse. So just following that foot around, especially when they're base narrow like that, it's not too much different than with the draft horses. The principles are the same, just the horse is different. You need to support the coronary band, and the base needs to support the hips, the mass of the hips. And if you have a horse that's extremely base narrow and very tall and strong, and then is very wide hipped, like some of these heavy muscled warm bloods and draft horses, you have a very bad mechanical situation going on, and then that's why you have injuries. Randy showed you some of these things earlier, where the base is not supporting the hips, and so. You can only extend a shoe so far laterally, fit full laterally, before it creates other problems. I think we all know that. Yeah. But we have to kind of, put something out there to keep, support that coronary band at the very least, which, was not done. The horse at the end with the jammed coronary band, I only showed you that to show you what these injuries looked like originally. That horse had about a 4 or 5 inch flare sticking out of this foot that was doing the same thing. It created a similar problem just for a different reason. But it was, it was way extended flare on that horse, and the horse is very base narrow. So that thing that was supposed to be support turned into leverage, and that's what did that coronary band in. Does that help you?
This question is for Adam. It's about your case anyway. Do you think we're ever going to get to a point where we can influence that shoulder to come down?
Absolutely.
How? Where do you see it coming from?
So it's a ratio of how long the horse has been like that and how much of a difference there is. And was it Dr. Van Epps or Dr. Pleasant who presented yesterday on radiographs and showed that they started radiographing foals. And I think it was like they did about 20 foals on this warm blood farm, and 95% of them in the first year of life had fractured coffin bones, because they had one case come in. They had a fractured coffin bone on this 3-week-old foal or something like that, and they're like, oh crap, what do we do with this? And then they're like, well, he's not that lame. And so then they started x-raying all these other ones. They found out that a lot of them broke their coffin bones anyways, was the point of it. So I think that the cause of those mismatch feet come from a imbalance in weight bearing for a little while, especially when they're developing. There's a Dutch vet back in the 90s who took a leg and he tied it up for an hour a day for 30 days, And at the end of that 30 days, he could measure a difference in the fetlock drop. That's only 30 cumulative hours. Well, you take that foal that's running around out there and break its coffin bone, and it doesn't want to stand on it, goes a little non-weight bearing and whatever, or however it's injured. So it doesn't take long to rack up 30 cumulative hours. So I think that they develop into that, you know, as a foal. Now, I think as aged horses, well, yearlings are really good because they're dynamic and they're still growing. So you can do this same principle with them and make some pretty drastic changes very quickly. Older horses, I think, that have been managing it for their whole life, you don't always fix it 100%, but the way to find this is stack a lift under the club foot and measure the drop of the fetlock and where the position of the knee is. Once you start lifting it to a certain point, you'll actually get to a point where that fetlock drops suddenly. Okay, like if you go from a 1/2 inch to 3/4 or 3/4 to an inch or something like that, and that drop comes from the shoulder relaxing. Okay, because you've now lifted that leg up out of the hole enough that the shoulder's not having to fire as much to hold the bottom of the leg up from the shoulder, so it releases. And now, even though you got 1.5 inches or so on the bottom, your fetlock has actually come down. So it's a little bit of a complicated process, but I've seen it done. I've seen it done on a horse that took about 1.5 inches a lift for the shoulder to relax. Now you're not going to get that on not even a saddlebred, or you're going to shoot them 1.5 inches difference, you know. But it's that constant kind of adjustment, going back and forth and doing it over time, and they will relax. And I had a Frisian horse that a lady owned with about a grade 4 club foot, and the only reason she was able to own it, she didn't have any money, but it was bred out the yazoo, but because it had a club foot, they had a contract. She couldn't breed it or anything like that. And I did this on that horse for about 6-8 months, and I never thought of it until she brought this up. She said, I had the saddle fitter out the other day, and if you imagine that picture that I showed of the 2 shoulder angles, she said that the lady had to take 1.5 inches of padding out of the shoulder side of the club foot. And I never thought about it until she brought that up. And that was the most tangible measurement that I had for how much that you can redevelop that shoulder and the foot comes along. So I know it was a long, complicated process, but that's a whole nother, you could do a whole day on that stuff. So.
Well, that says that shoeing is a process, not just an event.
Yeah. Yep.
Amen.
Yep.
I have to catch a shuttle, so have to say goodbye to you all.
That it? We're calling it?
Yeah, let's give them all a round of applause. Thanks, guys.